On the shores of the Mediterranean, amid the sting of salt and the howling winds from the desert, a city once rose that made even Rome tremble. Not through swords and spears, but through gold, silver, and sails. Carthage was not born to fight. It was born to trade. At a time when tribes still quarreled over watering holes, Carthage already commanded an ocean-spanning fleet, a trade network stretching from Spain to Egypt, and a treasury rich enough to hire an entire army without training a single soldier. A city that could buy war and buy peace. But like every empire that ever ruled the seas, wealth came at a price: envy. And then, Rome came knocking. If you've ever played AoE 2 and thought that spamming ranged units guarantees victory, think again. Because when Carthage enters the field, you'll witness an early booming economy, war elephants crushing your backline, and a civilization willing to pay any price to survive. Welcome to Carthage, Empire of Fire and Salt. Chapter 1. Fire over the Sea. The Rise of Carthage. On the northern edge of Africa, where the desert meets the sea, a city was born not from war, but from trade. Carthage did not rise through conquest or empire, but through salt, silver, and sails. As early as the 9th century BCE, seafaring merchants from the Phoenician city of Tyre planted their flag on a windswept coastline. They called it Carthage, the new city. What began as an outpost soon became the beating heart of a commercial empire. In an age when most settlements squabbled over cattle and wells, Carthage launched ships that crossed entire seas. She forged trade networks stretching from Iberia to Egypt, dealing in precious metals, fine textiles, glass, and the one thing no civilization could live without: salt. Her harbor was a marvel of ancient engineering, a circular naval dockyard that could house hundreds of ships, hidden behind high walls, guarded and efficient. Carthage thrived not through brute force, but by becoming indispensable. She traded, she negotiated, and when needed, she paid others to fight. The city grew rich, its markets bursting with spices, ivory, and ideas carried from faraway lands. Unlike the rustic tribes to the north, Carthage was sophisticated, urban, and mercantile. She wore her wealth proudly: temples plated in gold, towers rising above the waves, and statues that glittered in the sun. To any Age of Empires the Seku player, Carthage might feel like that sieve you pick not to rush, but to boom. An economy-first strategy rooted in map control and sea power. With its naval docks and merchant fleets, the city played like a civilization with early access to gold and food, but without a standing army ready for war. It didn't need one, not yet. But prosperity breeds envy. And as Carthage's sails reached deeper into the Mediterranean, they cast long shadows that reached all the way to Rome. To the Romans, Carthage was not merely a rival. She was an enigma, wealthy, elusive, and dangerously efficient. Her people spoke a foreign tongue, worshipped foreign gods, and valued profit over pride. While Roman legions marched with discipline and iron, Carthaginian merchants sailed with silver in their pockets and deals on their lips. This was not a people who would storm your gates. This was a people who would buy the key. But not all keys open every door. Beyond the riches and ships, Carthage held something more powerful than gold: ambition. Her colonies dotted the coastlines of North Africa, Sardinia, Corsica, and even Spain. Her influence spread like ink on parchment. And in the heart of the city, wealth flowed upward, fueling not kings or emperors, but a council of merchant elites, guided by profit and preservation. Yet beneath the polished surface of commerce, a transformation had already begun. To protect her holdings, Carthage had to raise armies, not of native sons, but of hired blades. Mercenaries from Numidia, Iberia, and Gaul filled her ranks, fighting not for honor, but for coin. Carthage's military was not built on bloodlines. It was built on contracts. And in the hills of North Africa, far from the bustle of the harbor, breeders began to tame giants. They were called forest elephants, smaller than their Indian cousins, but powerful and agile. Carthage trained them not just to carry cargo, but to charge into battle, armored and furious. Where gold could not win, these beasts would. Carthage had always fought with ledgers before swords, with diplomacy before steel. But the world was changing, and even merchant queens must prepare for war. Rome, rising steadily across the sea, would not be out-traded. She would have to be out-fought. It was not a question of if conflict would come. It was only a matter of when, and who would strike first. Soon, the merchant queen would become a mistress of war, not by abandoning trade, but by weaponizing it. She would pay for power, fund chaos, and unleash monsters across the battlefield. And at the center of this shift stood a family, wealthy, cunning, and hungry for glory. Their name was Barca, and their youngest son would grow up with a fire in his heart and a vow on his lips. A vow to burn Rome to the ground. Before the elephants charged and the legions bled, before mountains were crossed and oaths were made, Carthage first had to learn how to turn wealth into war. That story begins in chapter 2. War Elephants and Gold. Chapter 2. War Elephants and Gold. The power structure. Carthage had gold. Carthage had ships. But what truly made her dangerous was something far rarer. A system built not just to survive, but to profit from chaos. While Rome molded its strength through unity and citizen soldiers, Carthage thrived on something else entirely: flexibility. She was a city governed by merchants, not monarchs, guided by ledgers, not legacies. At the heart of Carthage stood the suffets, two annually elected officials, not unlike Roman consuls. But real power lay deeper, in the hands of a ruling elite, the 100-member council and a labyrinth of advisory bodies. This was a republic, yes, but one where silver spoke louder than blood. Laws were crafted like contracts. Military campaigns were debated like business ventures. Every risk was weighed, every investment scrutinized. War, to Carthage, was not glory. It was strategy. And when strategy required force, the city knew how to buy it. Carthage did not field massive standing armies of native citizens. Why should she? Instead, she turned to a more efficient, if dangerous, solution: mercenaries. From the wild horsemen of Numidia to the fierce warriors of Iberia, from Gallic swordsmen to Balearic slingers, Carthage built her legions like markets, diverse, specialized, and expendable. These men did not fight for country. They fought for coin, and Carthage paid well. This wasn't cowardice, it was calculus. Citizen soldiers might be brave, but they also questioned orders, brought politics to the battlefield, and cost years of training. Mercenaries, by contrast, were simple. You paid them, they fought. You stopped paying, they left. Brutal, but predictable. But money alone wasn't enough. Carthage also needed shock and awe. And so came the chariots, sleek, two-wheeled machines pulled by North African horses designed to slice through enemy ranks like razors. But even those paled in comparison to Carthage's greatest terror: the war elephant. Smaller than the Indian giants used in the East, North African forest elephants were still massive by Mediterranean standards. Carthage trained them for war, outfitting them with armor and mounting archers or spearmen on their backs. These beasts didn't just trample soldiers, they shattered morale. A single elephant charge could break a line of infantry, scatter cavalry, and send even veteran troops into a panic. In Age of Empires 2 terms, think of them like late-game power units. Expensive, slow to build, but devastating when used right. Carthage didn't mass-produce them like a spam sieve. They were investments, high risk, high reward, and when deployed at the right moment, they could change the course of a battle. But such a system had its flaws. Mercenaries could turn traitor, elephants could panic, and a council of merchants didn't always make the best generals. That's where one family stepped in to bridge the gap between wealth and warfare. The Barcas, led by Hamilcar Barca, this aristocratic clan believed Carthage needed more than profits. She needed vision. Hamilcar, a general forged in the fires of Sicily and hardened by betrayal, saw Rome not just as a threat, but as a rival destiny. He didn't trust the council to act quickly enough, so he acted on his own. He took his army, mercenaries, elephants and all, to Iberia. There, beyond the reach of the cautious Senate, he built a new power base. Gold mines funded his campaigns. Local tribes swore loyalty to him, not just to Carthage. And his sons watched it all, learning that war was not a duty, it was a craft. One son especially took these lessons to heart. His name was Hannibal. At just 9 years old, Hannibal swore an oath at an altar. He would never be a friend to Rome. That promise would shape history. But before Hannibal could march elephants across the Alps, before he could trap entire Roman armies in a single day, Carthage first had to test its war machine, and Rome was watching. Tension simmered on the island of Sicily. Trade routes clashed, allies shifted, and the Mediterranean, once a sea of commerce, began to churn with something darker. The first great war between these two titans was coming, and Carthage would learn that not every army can be bought, and not every battle can be calculated. In Chapter 3, Blood in Sardinia, the First Punic War begins. Chapter 3, Blood in Sardinia, the First Punic War. It began over a city most people today couldn't find on a map. Messana, perched on the northeastern tip of Sicily, had always been a strategic prize, a gateway between Italy and the riches of the Mediterranean. When a rogue group of mercenaries, the Mamertines, seized the city and called for help, both Rome and Carthage answered. Neither power could afford to let the other gain control. And just like that, two empires were dragged into a conflict that would last over 2 decades. The First Punic War wasn't supposed to be a war of giants. It began with skirmishes, sieges, and political maneuvering. Carthage had the advantage at sea, its navy unmatched in size and experience. Her triremes and quinqueremes cut through the waves like knives, crewed by sailors who'd grown up on the water. Rome, on the other hand, was a land power. Her legions could march, dig, and die in formation. But they had never fought a serious naval war. That would change fast. Rome, never one to back down from a challenge, did the unthinkable. They built a navy from scratch. Hundreds of warships were constructed in less than 2 years, modeled after a captured Carthaginian vessel. But Rome didn't just copy. They innovated. Enter the corvus. A brutal boarding device, the corvus was a massive plank with a spike, dropped onto enemy ships to lock them in place. It turned naval battles into something Romans understood: infantry combat. The seas became extensions of the battlefield, and suddenly, Carthage's advantage began to slip. Where naval micro and maneuvering once ruled, now brute strength and discipline won the day. In Age of Empires, 2 terms. It was like watching a pure naval sieve get countered by a land sieve that tech switched mid-match. Carthage had the better ships, but Rome turned every sea clash into a land brawl. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. For years, the war dragged on. Sicily became a graveyard for men and ambitions. Fortresses were built and razed, fleets rose and sank. Carthage leveraged its mercenaries and sea lanes. Rome threw wave after wave of citizen soldiers into the fire. And still, neither side broke. The fighting soon spilled into Corsica, Sardinia, and even North Africa. Carthage repelled a Roman landing near its own gates, but at a heavy cost. Financial strain mounted. Mercenary loyalty wavered. Meanwhile, Rome's stubborn resilience proved its greatest weapon. Every defeat was met with reconstruction. Every sunken fleet was rebuilt. It was a grind Carthage wasn't built to sustain. By 241 BCE, after 23 years of war, Carthage sued for peace. The terms were brutal. Sicily was lost, indemnities were imposed, and worst of all, Rome had tasted victory over the sea. In the aftermath, Carthage faced internal collapse. Unpaid mercenaries rebelled. Sardinia was seized by Rome under dubious pretenses. And the once proud merchant empire found itself bleeding both coin and pride. But not all was lost. In the shadows of defeat, one general had not forgotten the lessons of war. Hamilcar Barca, hardened and humiliated, saw in Iberia the seeds of redemption. If Carthage was to rise again, it would need a new base of power, a new generation of warriors, and a new kind of leadership. A young boy followed him through every campaign, watched every decision, and remembered every Roman slight. That boy was Hannibal, and his war had not yet begun. In Chapter 4, Hannibal Barca, the general who hated Rome. Chapter 4, Hannibal Barca, the general who hated Rome. Long before the Alps echoed with the cries of war elephants, before Roman legions trembled at the name Hannibal, a boy stood before his father and made a vow that would change the course of history. He was 9 years old. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was preparing to sail to Iberia on a campaign to rebuild Carthage's strength after the bitter loss of the First Punic War. As legend tells it, Hamilcar brought his son to the temple of Baal Hamon. There, surrounded by flame and stone, he made Hannibal swear never to be a friend to Rome. That oath wasn't a child's game. It was a blood promise, one that would fuel decades of war, unimaginable suffering, and one of the most audacious military campaigns the world has ever known. Hannibal did not grow up in comfort. He was raised in the field, among soldiers and mercenaries, in a culture where profit and power were earned, not inherited. He learned not just the arts of war, but the arts of persuasion, logistics, and leadership. While Rome trained its youth in law and rhetoric, Hannibal learned how to move armies through hostile lands, how to win loyalty from foreign tribes, and, perhaps most importantly, how to hate. When Hamilcar died, command passed to Hasdrubal the Fair and then to Hannibal himself. He was just 26. And he wasted no time. His eyes turned to the river Ebro, a boundary agreed upon with Rome. But Hannibal, now commander-in-chief of Carthaginian forces in Iberia, tested that line. He besieged the city of Saguntum, a Roman ally. It was a deliberate move. He wasn't baiting a local skirmish. He was declaring war. Rome was outraged. But it underestimated the young general. They assumed he would fight in Spain, perhaps sail across to Sicily. What they didn't imagine, what no one imagined, was what Hannibal did next. He would bring the war to Rome, but not by sea. Carthage no longer ruled the Mediterranean. The Romans did. So Hannibal chose a path no general had taken before. He would lead his army, tens of thousands of infantry, cavalry, and a squad of war elephants, over the towering, snow-capped Alps. It was madness. It was genius. The journey itself was hell. Treacherous mountain passes, blizzards, starvation, ambushes by mountain tribes. It's said Hannibal lost half his force before even reaching Italy. The elephants suffered, the men froze, and yet they came through. And when they emerged on the northern plains of Italy, Rome was stunned. It was like a late-game raid in Age of Empires 2, where a player who seems cornered suddenly hits your weakest point from an unexpected angle. Hannibal didn't knock on Rome's gates. He crashed through the back window. He moved fast. He recruited Gauls disillusioned with Roman rule. He supplied his army from the field, striking Roman supply lines, winning small battles with precise tactics. Each victory wasn't just about numbers. It was about psychology. Rome had never faced anything like this. Hannibal became more than a general. He was a ghost, a storm, a nightmare whispered among Roman ranks. And yet, he was very real. He didn't just fight Rome, he unmade the myth of its invincibility. Like a hero unit in a campaign scenario, he changed the rules of the game. His presence bent the battlefield. The Romans had superior numbers, home advantage, and seemingly endless reserves. Hannibal had strategy, audacity, and absolute control over his forces. He didn't just defeat Roman armies, he humiliated them. But his most devastating move was yet to come. In the rolling fields near the town of Cannae, Hannibal would orchestrate one of the most brilliant tactical victories in military history. A maneuver so precise, so devastating, that it would echo through time. In Chapter 5, Cannae, Rome's worst nightmare, the trap is set. Chapter 5, Cannae, Rome's worst nightmare. On the morning of August 2nd, 216 BCE, the sun rose over the Apulian plains of southern Italy. Dust hung in the air. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers stood in formation, armored, disciplined, and determined. They outnumbered their enemy nearly 2-1. Victory seemed inevitable. By sunset, over 50,000 of them were dead. The Battle of Cannae was not just a Roman defeat. It was a reckoning, a massacre, and a masterclass in battlefield genius. After 2 years of stunning victories across Italy, Hannibal Barca had earned both fear and fury. Rome, desperate to end his campaign, assembled the largest army it had ever fielded, an estimated 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Led by consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, they sought a final confrontation. Hannibal gave it to them. He chose the field near Cannae deliberately. Flat, open terrain, with the Aufidus River to one side and a dry, dusty expanse to the other. Perfect, it would seem, for Roman heavy infantry. But Hannibal had no intention of fighting fair. His army was smaller, perhaps 40,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry. But it was sharper, more agile. He arranged his troops in a crescent formation, placing his weaker infantry, mostly Gauls and Iberians, in the center. On the flanks, he positioned his African veterans, men who had fought with him since Spain. His cavalry, led by the brilliant Hannibal, took the wings. What happened next is studied in military academies to this day. As the battle began, the Roman legions surged forward, smashing into Hannibal's center. The Carthaginian line bent, then slowly fell back, like a bowstring being pulled taut. It wasn't collapse. It was invitation. As the Romans pressed inward, eager for a breakthrough, Hannibal's wings began to curl around them. The crescent straightened and became a bowl, Then the bowl closed. The African infantry on the flanks surged inward, striking the exposed Roman sides. Simultaneously, the Carthaginian cavalry, having routed their Roman counterparts, wheeled around and charged the rear. The trap snapped shut. In the chaos, tens of thousands of Romans were surrounded. There was no room to maneuver, no space to retreat. The compact formations that once gave Rome strength now became a death trap. Men suffocated, trampled, butchered. The killing lasted for hours. By day's end, the field was red. Estimates vary, but ancient sources claim between 50,000 and 70,000 Romans died. It was the single deadliest day in Rome's military history. Hannibal had done the unthinkable. With a smaller force, he had destroyed the Roman war machine in open battle. His tactics, known now as the double envelopment or pincer movement, are legendary. It was the ultimate bait and flank, a strategy that relied not on brute strength, but on timing, psychology, and precision. In Age of Empire's 2 terms, this was the perfect surround tactic, baiting the enemy to overcommit, then enveloping them with faster, more flexible units. It's the moment where a smart player with fewer resources outmaneuvers a stronger opponent and wins the game. But Hannibal wasn't playing a game. He was rewriting the rules of war. And yet, even after such a staggering victory, he faced a dilemma. Rome, wounded but not broken, refused to surrender. The Senate mustered new armies. Cities remained loyal. Hannibal had won the battle, but not the war. Still, Cannae shook the foundations of the Roman world. Allies defected. Panic spread. Superstition took hold. To many, it seemed the gods themselves favored Carthage. But as we'll see, brilliance on the battlefield was not enough. Victory in war, like in strategy games, requires more than tactics. It demands timing, resources, and sometimes politics. In Chapter 6, From Zama to Ashes, we explore why Carthage, even after Cannae, ultimately lost the war. Chapter 6. Why Carthage Lost, From Zama to Ashes. A city that once ruled the waves, that sent elephants over the Alps and brought mighty Rome to its knees, would one day lie in ruins, salted and silent. The fall of Carthage is not just the end of a city. It is the story of how even the greatest empires can unravel, not from one defeat, but from within. After Cannae, Rome trembled. Hannibal roamed Italy for years, winning allies, ravaging supply lines, and defeating Roman armies. But for all his brilliance, he faced a silent war at home. The Carthaginian Senate grew wary. They refused to send significant reinforcements. Some feared Hannibal's growing power. Others preferred protecting trade interests over total war. It was a fatal miscalculation. Rome, on the other hand, adapted. It learned. It endured. Despite defeat after defeat, it refused to yield. The Senate raised fresh legions, reformed its command structures, and found a leader of its own to match Hannibal: Publius Cornelius Scipio. Scipio was young, ambitious, and unorthodox. He understood that chasing Hannibal in Italy would be a never-ending war. So he took the fight to Africa. Landing in Carthage's backyard, Scipio forced the Senate to recall Hannibal from Italy. After nearly 15 years of campaigning abroad, Hannibal finally came home. The stage was set for one final showdown. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, two of antiquity's greatest minds faced each other in the open plains of North Africa. Hannibal had about 50,000 men, including a new force of war elephants. Scipio had around 35,000, but his troops were hardened veterans, and he had Numidian cavalry. the very horsemen who once fought for Hannibal. The battle began with the elephants charging, but Scipio had anticipated this. His troops opened lanes between their formations, allowing the elephants to pass through while harassing them with javelins. Many panicked and turned back, disrupting Hannibal's own lines. Then came the infantry clash, a brutal, grinding melee. Hannibal held his veterans in reserve, hoping to break Roman morale with fresh reinforcements late in the fight. But Scipio's forces held firm, and when the Numidian cavalry returned from routing their counterparts, they slammed into the Carthaginian rear. It was Cannae in reverse. Hannibal was outflanked, outlasted, and outmaneuvered. For the first time, the master of ambush and strategy had been bested. But Zama wasn't just a tactical loss. It was the final blow in a long, slow bleed. Carthage lost because it failed to support its best general when it mattered most. Internal divisions, fear of Hannibal's rising fame, and a reliance on mercenaries weakened the city's core. It had wealth, but not unity. Tactics, but not long-term vision. Rome, by contrast, was like a late-game Civ in Age of Empires 2 that starts slow, takes heavy hits, but eventually snowballs. Its economy recovered. Its tech tree expanded. It shifted from reactive defense to total war. And when the time came, it hit Carthage exactly where it hurt. In gameplay terms, Carthage was a Civ with early aggression, strong raids, and powerful unique units, but terrible late-game sustain. Once the gold mines dried up and the reinforcements stopped coming, they were outmatched by a Civ with superior cavalry and late-game eco. After Zama, Carthage was stripped of its navy, forbidden from waging war without Roman approval, and burdened with crushing tribute. It survived, for a time. But wounds fester. Rome did not forget, nor forgive. Voices in the Senate began repeating a chilling phrase. Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed, and one day Rome would return to finish what it started. In Chapter 7, the Third Punic War, Carthage faces its final siege, and a civilization vanishes into fire and salt. Chapter 7. The Third Punic War. Carthago delenda est. They didn't want victory. They wanted annihilation. Rome had beaten Carthage once at Zama. It had imposed terms, taken hostages, claimed tribute. Carthage was broken, disarmed, and humbled. But it wasn't dead. And for some in Rome, that was a problem. Chief among them was Cato the Elder, a Roman statesman who ended every speech, no matter the topic, with the same phrase, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. He saw the city not just as a defeated rival, but as a lingering threat, one that must be erased from memory, not just maps. By the mid-2nd century BCE, Carthage had rebuilt itself into a prosperous trading hub. No navy, no military ambitions. But gold still flowed through its ports, and its people thrived. That success, however peaceful, stirred Roman envy and paranoia. Then came the spark. Carthage, under siege from neighboring Numidian raids, raised an army to defend itself, technically violating the treaty with Rome. It was a desperate act, born of necessity, but it gave Rome the excuse it needed. In 149 BCE, the Senate declared war. The Third Punic War had begun. Rome landed a massive invasion force on African soil. Carthage, realizing what was coming, offered everything: hostages, weapons, even to destroy its own defenses. But Rome wanted more. Rome wanted the city itself. Carthaginians were ordered to evacuate and move inland. When they refused, Rome began the siege. What followed was a death match. For nearly 3 years, from 149 to 146 BCE, Carthage held out against overwhelming force. It became a last stand in every sense. Men, women, and children fortified the city walls, forged weapons from temple bronze, and turned every street into a trap. Roman forces, led by Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, faced brutal resistance. Carthage fought with the desperation of a civilization cornered. There was no retreat, no reinforcement, no hope for rescue, just survival. In Age of Empires 2 terms, this was a late-game hold where you're out of gold, down to trash units, but fighting tooth and nail in the ruins of your last town center. And your enemy? A maxed-out imperial civ with infinite resources and siege spam. Scipio knew a direct assault would be bloody, so he starved the city. He cut supply lines, he built siege towers, breached the outer walls, then the inner. The final phase was house-to-house combat, grueling, merciless urban warfare. By the end of it, Carthage was ash. The city was burned. Survivors, those not slaughtered, were sold into slavery. Legend says the Romans salted the earth, so nothing could grow again. Whether or not that's literally true doesn't matter. What mattered was the message. Rome had not just won, it had erased. The Third Punic War wasn't fought over territory. It was fought over memory, fear, and vengeance. It was Rome proving that there would be no second Cannae, no second Hannibal, no second Carthage. And in that fire, a lesson for history and strategy games alike. Dominance isn't always about the next battle. Sometimes it's about making sure there isn't one. In the next chapter, we step back from the battlefield and look at the Carthaginian machine that powered this empire. Its economy of salt, slaves, and ships. But while the flames consumed the city and Roman boots trampled its last defenders, not everything was lost. Beneath the ashes of Carthage lay the skeleton of an empire, built not just on war but on trade. Salt, slaves, and ships had once made Carthage the envy of the Mediterranean. To truly understand how such a power rose so high, we must look beyond the battlefield and into the heartbeat of its economy. In Chapter 8, Carthaginian Economy, Salt, Slaves, and Ships, we explore the engine that once drove an empire to greatness and why even fire couldn't burn away its legacy. Chapter 8, Carthaginian Economy, Salt, Slaves, and Ships. Before Carthage fought Rome, it bought the Mediterranean. With salt, silver, and slaves, it built an empire not by the sword, but by the sail. While we remember Hannibal's elephants and the ashes of the Third Punic War, Carthage's true power came from something far less dramatic and far more enduring: its economy. Founded by Phoenician traders from Tyre around 800 BCE, Carthage inherited and expanded a commercial legacy that stretched across the Mediterranean. It was not merely a colony. It became the capital of a maritime network that included Sardinia, Corsica, Sicily, the Balearic Islands, parts of Iberia, and even outposts along the West African coast. Salt was among its earliest and most important exports. It preserved meat, flavored food, and was considered so vital that it once served as currency. The salt pans around Carthage and in North Africa fed not just Carthaginian ships, but also Roman markets. Then came metals: silver from Iberia, copper from Sardinia, and gold from the Sahara. These resources, gathered and traded, formed the backbone of Carthage's vast wealth. But this wealth wasn't static. Carthage turned it into power. With coin came influence. With influence came control. Unlike many ancient empires, Carthage didn't expand through conquest alone. Instead, it built a commercial hegemony. Cities paid tribute not just out of fear, but in exchange for access to trade networks. Carthaginian merchants became fixtures in foreign markets. Carthaginian ships, sleek, fast, and heavily manned, ruled the waves. The harbor of Carthage itself, a dual-port marvel of engineering, could dock hundreds of vessels simultaneously. In Age of Empires, two terms. Carthage was a trade-heavy civ with an early economic boom. Think of a mix between the Portuguese with their naval bonuses, the Malians with their gold-centric economies, and the Italians, who tech up faster thanks to trade-focused efficiencies. Their strength lay not in constant warfare, but in outpacing rivals economically. They could afford to hire mercenaries, Libyans, Numidians, Iberians, rather than field vast standing armies. Carthage didn't need to bleed its citizens on foreign soil when it could pay others to do it. Of course, this had its drawbacks. Mercenaries lacked loyalty. When the gold stopped flowing, so did their swords. And a trade empire, no matter how rich, could be vulnerable to blockades, piracy, or war. When Carthage lost its navy and its access to trade after the Second Punic War, the lifeblood of the city slowed to a trickle. Still, in its prime, Carthage's economy was the stuff of legend. Ancient sources described markets overflowing with spices, textiles, precious metals, and enslaved laborers from across the continent. Carthaginian merchants were skilled navigators and even developed early maritime manuals to guide their journeys. Slavery, while dark and brutal, was a cornerstone of this system. Carthage captured and traded slaves en masse, using them for labor in mines, farms, and shipyards. The human cost of this economy was immense, but it also enabled the city to scale its infrastructure rapidly. From olive oil to purple dye, Carthaginian products reached every corner of the sea. Its colonies were more than military outposts. They were economic engines. In Iberia, vast silver mines funded Hannibal's campaigns. In North Africa, fertile lands grew wheat and olives, feeding both the city and its fleets. These colonial holdings functioned like extensions of the capital, not just satellites. Even after military defeats, Carthage often bounced back quickly because of this economic depth. After the First Punic War, it paid heavy indemnities to Rome, yet managed to recover swiftly by expanding trade with Africa and Iberia. Carthage also innovated financially. It minted its own coinage, managed complex contracts, and maintained detailed records of trade. This level of sophistication was unmatched in the Western Mediterranean for centuries. In gameplay terms, Carthage would be the civ that booms hard, trades smarter, and delays direct conflict until it's economically unstoppable. But, like any glass cannon, if pressured early or cut off from trade routes, its weaknesses show fast. When Carthage finally fell in 146 BCE, Rome didn't just destroy a rival. It dismantled an entire economic system. Yet even in its destruction, echoes of Carthage's commercial prowess lived on. Roman merchants adopted Carthaginian roots. Roman engineers studied their harbors. And Roman coins eventually flowed through the same markets once ruled by Carthaginian traders. In the next chapter, we explore what remained after the fire, the ruins, the legends, and the legacy that refused to die. Chapter 9. Legacy and Ruins. What survived the flames. When the fires of war died down and Rome's legions returned home, what remained of Carthage seemed like little more than blackened stone and silence. But legacies are stubborn. They linger in ways cities cannot. Carthage, the city, was gone, but Carthage, the idea, the influence, the echo, that endured. We often imagine the end of ancient civilizations as total. One day they're there, and the next, wiped clean from the map. But history rarely works that way. After the Third Punic War, Rome sowed destruction, but it also left traces, both intentional and not. And from those ashes, parts of Carthage's identity seeped into the fabric of the world that followed. Take writing, for example. The Punic language, a derivative of Phoenician, was spoken well into the early centuries CE. While the written script eventually faded, inscriptions survive. Grave markers, trade records, even graffiti in North African cities echo the Punic tongue. Elements of Carthaginian names and syntax even appear in later Berber dialects. Architecturally, Carthage had pioneered certain harbor designs, city planning methods, and defensive structures that Rome quietly studied. The famous circular military harbor, capable of housing hundreds of warships in organized docks, inspired later port designs in both Roman and Islamic worlds. Aqueducts and cisterns built by the Carthaginians were repurposed by the Romans and remained in use for centuries. Religion, too, refused to vanish. Carthaginian deities, particularly Baal, Hammon, and Tanit, were demonized by Roman writers. But traces of their cults persisted underground, especially in rural North Africa. Over time, some rituals associated with these gods blended with local traditions, creating hybrid spiritual practices that outlasted even Roman rule. In early Christian writings from the Maghreb, echoes of Punic theology can still be detected, usually in the form of heresies or syncretic sects. In a strange twist of fate, the city Rome tried to erase was eventually rebuilt by Rome itself. Julius Caesar, recognizing the strategic and symbolic value of the site, refounded Carthage as a Roman colony in the 1st century BCE. By the time of Augustus, it had become one of the most important cities in Roman Africa. At its height, Roman Carthage boasted amphitheaters, forums, and temples that rivaled those of any Italian city. Yet beneath the Roman marble lay Punic stone. Beneath Latin statues stood Punic foundations. Carthage lived on, too, in the minds of its enemies. Roman writers, from Virgil to Livy, wrote obsessively about the Punic Wars. Carthage was cast alternately as a villain, a warning, or a lost rival. Hannibal became a mythic figure, both feared and admired. In doing so, Rome preserved the memory it tried so hard to destroy. Centuries later, Islamic dynasties like the Aghlabids and the Fatimids built their North African capitals not far from Carthage's ruins. Some even used materials scavenged from the old city. These new powers inherited the region's trade routes and some of its urban patterns. The Islamic Golden Age in North Africa did not arise from a vacuum. It grew from layers of forgotten stone, Punic, then Roman, then Arab. In Age of Empires, 2 terms. This is where legacy bonuses come into play. Carthage may not be on the map anymore, but its remnants act like passive buffs. Think of them as relics tucked away in the corners of history, each one giving slow, steady gold to those who control the memory. Some civs gain conversion resistance from past traditions. Others inherit techs, buildings, or even naval advantages passed down like invisible upgrades. You can destroy a civilization's army. You can raise its buildings. But influence? Influence leaks. It survives in languages, ports, temples, trade routes, and textbooks. It crosses oceans and generations. It bends, adapts, and waits to be found again. So while Rome burned Carthage to the ground, it also unknowingly helped scatter its seeds across an empire. In the next chapter, we leave history behind and ask, what if Carthage were reborn, not in ruins, but in ranked multiplayer? Chapter 10. Carthage in multiplayer. From forgotten to feared, no one expects Carthage. In most Age of Empires 2 multiplayer matches, people think of Franks, Mayans, or Mongols. No one bans Carthage. No one scouts for elephant spam. Until suddenly they do. And by then, it's too late. Carthage, if imagined as a civilization in the definitive edition, is the perfect example of a sleeper civ. Underwhelming at first glance, underestimated in early game, and then devastating once its strategy comes online. Its identity lies not in sheer speed or relentless early aggression, but in smart resource management, deceptive build orders, and powerful late-game compositions that can flip the tide of battle when opponents least expect it. Let's be honest. No one picks Carthage in a 1 versus 1 Arabia match expecting a quick win. Their early game is weak, no access to top-tier archers. Barracks units feel sluggish, even their economy starts off awkward. But Carthage isn't built for that kind of fight. It was never about rushing head first. It was about enduring, absorbing, and then retaliating with overwhelming force. That force, in multiplayer, often comes in the form of elephants. War elephants in Age of Empires II are usually seen as a meme unit. Too expensive, too slow, too easily countered by monks, halberdiers, or even pathfinding. But Carthaginian elephants come with a twist. In this imagined meta, they are slightly faster, more resistant to conversion, and backed by strong economy techs that reduce their food cost over time. Still expensive? Yes. But manageable. Especially when you've boomed 3 trade routes by minute 40. Here's the typical Carthaginian play in a team game. Phase 1. Turtle and boom. No feudal rushes here. Instead, a classic fast castle into booming with an early market to establish trade. Think Portuguese with Malian's mining bonuses. The Carthaginian player builds toward long-term eco-power, not short-term pressure. On open maps, this looks suicidal. But on closed maps, especially Black Forest or Arena, it becomes deadly. Phase 2. Trade line optimization. While others fight in the middle, Carthage locks down the corners. With faster trade carts and gold trickle bonuses from docked ships or map control, they can amass massive gold surpluses before others even hit full pop. This gold bankrolls mercenaries, siege units, and of course, elephants. Phase 3. The Elephant Flood. By minute 50, when other civs are throwing Habskurm mixes or trash wars, Carthage rolls out its trump card. 40 fully upgraded war elephants with splash damage and extra armor from unique techs. Supported by siege rams and monks, they slam into enemy lines like a wrecking ball. You might hold once, maybe twice, but Carthage doesn't stop. Their eco can afford the replacements. Yours can't. Alternative builds. Trash navy and hybrid play. Some Carthaginian players forgo elephants for what is jokingly called the trash navy strategy. On hybrid maps like Mediterranean or Team Islands, they build up cheap transport ships, fast-firing galleys, and dock bonuses that make their water control deceptively effective. Add in a few fire ships with bonus damage versus fishing ships, and suddenly the early naval game becomes viable. Even funnier? Some go full meme. Triple dock slingers into transport ship landings. It rarely works. But when it does, it's chaos. Why Carthage works? Carthage is a civ for patient players. It rewards those who plan 5 steps ahead, not 1. Its core mechanics encourage passive map control, efficient eco-scaling, and sudden power spikes. You're not meant to take every fight. You're meant to choose the one that matters. It's a CIV that punishes overconfidence. When opponents push too hard and overextend, Carthaginian armies envelop them. When they invest in skirmisher-heavy comps, Carthage hits them with siege and cavalry. When they think they've won, Carthage starts phase 2. drawbacks, and counters. Of course, it's not invincible. Aggressive scout civs or monk-heavy comps can stop Carthage early. Longbow civs with superior range can whittle them down. Civs with strong early timings, like Aztecs or Huns, can cripple the Carthaginian eco before it comes online. But that's the gamble. If Carthage survives, they thrive. In the end, Carthage in multiplayer is like its real-life counterpart. Overlooked, resilient, and brutally effective when left unchecked. It's the civ for players who don't need to win minute 10. They'll win minute 60. The ones who smile when their elephants break the gate. So next time you see Carthage in the lobby, maybe don't laugh, or at least wall up fast, because no one expects Carthage. And that's exactly the point. Carthage may be gone from history, but in the world of Age of Empires, its spirit marches on. Through elephants, trade routes, and those who choose patience over panic. From forgotten to feared, Carthage proves that the slowest civs sometimes hit the hardest. If you've enjoyed this journey through fire, salt, and steel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story from Lost Throne. Whether it's another ancient empire or a battlefield forgotten by time, we'll be there to dig it up. Got a civ you want to see covered? Drop it in the comments. And remember, history isn't just in the books. Sometimes it's in your Pop 200 army, marching forward one tile at a time.